Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am your host, James, and joining me is Joe.
Hey, folks, how you doing?
Also joining us is a longtime guest and friend of the show, Jack.
Yeah, hello everyone.
And joining us once again is our local, our best creator that we know. He's been a friend of the pod. I think this is his seventh appearance, maybe eighth appearance. You're going to have like a co-host chair at some point. He is the writer of All Things We Love, All Characters We Love, and he's back with his latest Kickstarter project. I'm very honored and excited, as always, to have Michael Jan Friedman back on the podcast.
Good to see you guys.
Well, Mike, thank you for coming back on. This is very exciting. I mean, we're always excited to have you on. We're always excited for every project you have on. But I think this Kickstarter, you might have teased way back like two years ago when you 1st appeared on the show.
Well, yeah. It's been a long-term project. Several years ago, I kickstarted a graphic novel and delivered that called Empty Space. And ever since then, I've in fact at the end of that graphic novel, I said, "Will we see more of our hero Robinson Dark?" And I had every intention of bringing him back, but then other projects came along and took my time. But I finally found a slot for Empty Space, the sequel. Except the sequel is a prose project, and it's called Empty Space Betrayal. And it picks up where the graphic novel left off. Although you don't really have to read the graphic novel to enjoy the prose book, but if you do, it gives you an extra layer um, of understanding and value.
No, it's awesome. I was very excited when I got the email from you because I backed a lot of your Kickstarters, and I got the email one night. I'm like, this is happening? I was like, I was like, because he's been mentioning it for so long, it's happening. So I was very excited. I gotta admit, I'm late to the party because Joe's been championing this book, I think, since your first appearance on the podcast. You mentioned it, I think, in passing. You had done Empty Space, and he went out and bought it. And I'm grateful to like have a chance to finally read it. And it's amazing. I gotta say, it's amazing. I was very pleased with it, and we're gonna do a spoiler-free thing, folks, because to talk about the Kickstarter right away, the original Empty Space is one of the tiers you can buy into, right, Mike?
Yeah. It's I made that available either as a hardcover, a softcover, or an ebook. Any of those options are open for those who want to sample the first Empty Space project, either by itself or in addition to the new book.
Very good. So I guess we could just start just to give the landscape for the Empty Space universe. Do you? I'll let with you. What would for a person who's not read Empty Space at all, is either considering buying the new one or the original? What would you say as like a summary for them?
Well, it's a space adventure, and there's a certain amount of mystery involved. The way it opens, our hero, a guy named Robinson Dark, um, wakes up on a ship that kind of looks familiar but isn't, and in a uniform that kind of looks familiar that is but isn't. And little by little, he finds out that he's um, uh, been resurrected, and not only resurrected, but he was on ice for a while and been resurrected decades later. So he's both a man out of time and also a man whose time is running out. Because what happens with these resurrected characters is they go a month, 2 months, 6 months. We're not sure in any one case, and then they go berserk and they die. So his time is certainly running out. And why do they have these empties? How did the whole idea of empties come about? Um, they're called empties because they're devoid of emotion. That's one of the drawbacks of bringing them back. And it came about because these ships are so far flung from Earth that they can't readily replenish crew, so they can't keep coming back to Earth planets to replenish crew. So they had to find a way to do that. They didn't have the space to create robots or androids or anything like that. So they came up with a technology where they could take their dead if they move quickly. They could take their dead and bring them back to life for a certain period of time.
No, that's well, you're the writer, so you know how to do a great summary about the book and the universe. So I'm going to turn it over to like Jack and Joe for a little bit. So we've all got the opportunity. We've all read the original Empty Space. Like I said, we're going to keep it spoiler free. But Jack, what were your thoughts reading the Empty Space, the first graphic novel, and then what questions would you like to open with?
Oh, well, thank you, James. I have so many. I think for me, the first one I wanted to start with, and I think it's I think a very touching thing is I do appreciate that Robin Stark is a person of color, and so I wanted to know from you as the writer, what motivated that. I think in many space adventures that is not something we typically see. Joe and James know that Deep Space Nine is one of my, beloved kind of science fiction adventure shows within the Star Trek universe. And obviously that's got Avery Brooks playing the key role of Benjamin Sisko. But, I speaking personally, I was very gravitated to the character for that reason. And so, apart from being very appreciative for you to make that creative choice, I wanted to know for you as a creator, what kind of spurred that decision?
Right. Well, initially I came up with the character long before I came up with the idea of how he looked.
Mm.
And I guess, I was doing a project with Will Smith years ago, and we were talking about intergenerational permutations of a particular family line. And, at one point they looked this way, at another point they looked that way. At one point, some of them looked Asian, and I just said, let's let's go with somebody of color. And and I don't know. I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I just said, let's do that. It was, I think it's about balance. I I think there are plenty of white heroes and heroines, and I just figured this was an opportunity to balance the scales a little bit.
Wow. Thank you from a future fan. I wanted to say thank you. It's truly appreciated. It's definitely something that I'd like to share with my sons. Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah, great, great, great.
Yeah, I was gonna so kind of like just jumping off of Jack's question a little bit. The art is beautiful. Like? How do you pronounce the artist's name? I don't want to do like
Yeah, I
His
don't
name
remember
is
exactly.
Caio Cacau.
Caio Cacau.
Caio
Yeah, Caio
Cacau.
Cacau's work is amazing. Like it's just I know Joe had spoken about it before, but actually getting to read it, I was like, wow, this is like a really beautiful book. And so this is like just a general question, I guess. For we've had a few other writers on the podcast, but so how did you like? Is everything in all the panels things that you have mapped out for Kaya? Like how did and the designs of the characters, or does he come to you with like concepts and you approve them? How did your process work for creating the look of that book?
I well, I knew at some point before I brought him in, I had a fair idea of what I wanted everything to look like. The characters, the uniforms, the gear. I had a fair idea, but he made contributions. He took what I said and he ran with it. Um, he had a lot to do with designing the look of the aliens involved. And we worked full script. So, and I like that because it gives me more control. There are two ways of writing scripts, comic book scripts. One is full script, which is basically like a movie script. Here's the action, here's the dialogue, and here are the captions if there are any. And I break it out panel by panel. In this panel, here's what happens. Here's what they say. In this panel, here's how this looks. Here's what they say. Um, the alternative is to do it what they call Marvel style, which is the writer would let the artist know, here's what happens on this page. The artist would break it down, and then the writer would come back and put in the dialogue. Less control for the writer, more control for the artist. But we worked full script.
No, it's I like when I first seeing the book and reading through it, like you said, there's a lot of mysteries in the empty space universe, which maybe we'll get some answers in the new Kickstarter. I guess we'll see. We'll talk about that soon.
Okay.
But I feel like between your writing and the art, it's a very lived-in universe, is what I thought about when I was reading it. I don't know if that was the intention you conveyed to Caio, or if that's like how your full script was, but it feels very lived in. It felt, to me personally, and Chris would be here, I'm sure he could back this up, but it felt like it almost felt like a Babylon 5 Expanse type of universe where there's a lot of things that are happening. There's a lot of things to be explored. Not that Star Trek doesn't have it, but the look of his art and the design of his characters drew me to those two, I guess, properties. So I'm very, I just was curious, like, is that what you relied on? Because I want this universe to book lived in.
Yes, I did. I was concerned about that because you don't want the events in the book to take place in a vacuum. I guess they do take place literally, but
No pun intended.
you don't want them to take place without context. And so you have to have a history of the galaxy. You have to have a history of the individual characters, and so yeah, I wanted it to be lived in. And actually, part of the challenge of writing the novel was making it more lived in. In a comic, there's a lot that's suggested by the dialogue, by the artwork. In a comic, you actually have. I mean, in a novel, prose novel, you actually have to say these things. Here's what came before. Here's where things are. So you really have to provide a lot more information. So it's kind of a challenge giving that lived-in impression in a prose novel. But I enjoyed that. It's always fun. As you know, I've written a lot of Star Trek books, and that was it was always fun for me to find new corners of a universe that hadn't really been explored and explore them. So I like that. I like finding a niche here and there, building on something that hadn't yet been built on. So that universe building is fun.
Yeah, no, like I said, I can't, I know you can't say, but I'm looking forward to like what we have coming up with the Kickstarter. So, but Joe, you were an early adopter of this work. Mike mentioned it, early podcast. You went out, found a copy in the wild.
Found a copy in the wild, yes, on Amazon.
And so, I'll open it to you for questions and thoughts.
Well, I don't want to take up too much Jack's time because I know Jack has some questions and it's his first time reading it, and so I'll be brief. But rereading it the second time, I noticed some things that I didn't notice the first time, obviously, about some of the supporting characters, about the universe and how things work in this universe and how things work with the empties. And this is just the way my headcanon works when and you'll get it. You'll understand when you see the cap I'm wearing right now. But the captain of the ship is Captain Lindgren.
Right.
Second time around, I immediately thought of, and she's pretty. She's a badass. And I thought, well, maybe, possibly, her great grandfather was a defenseman on the New York Rangers, whose name was Ryan Lindgren. So,
well, I'm not sure. Sure, why not?
Right?
Why not? Let's go with that. You pick up. There are two places I pick up names. One is just sports figures. So yeah, it's entirely possible that that I was thinking of that guy at that time. I know I'm familiar with him. The other thing is, it's a Kickstarter project, so people pledge for uh, one-time mentions or full-fledged tuckerizations, which is where you take them and you make them a character in the book. Um, and in the graphic novel, we even did likenesses, which, by the way, we're doing again as full page art in in Empty Space Betrayal. So in some cases, um, there are characters in there who were backers of the project, and in other cases, as I said, I use a lot of sports figures when I'm coming up with names. I did that in my Star Trek books as well.
I think it's great. Just don't name anybody Brady. That's all.
Oh, that'll never
Okay. I also the artist again, Caio Cacau. Did I say that correctly? Okay. Very cinematic. Your writing style matches his artwork so perfectly. Things just move along at a frenetic pace, and it's just wonderful to read. And that's what I got out of it more the second time. How frenetic this thing moves and how quickly it moves, and yet it's not devoid of nuance at the same time. There's so many things going on at a great pace. Just a joy to read.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think everybody likes that, right? I mean, you want things to move along, and you want them to move in a comic. Certainly, you want them to move along visually, um, and in terms of the style, there was a director named Eisenstein, early director of movies, and uh, I think he was Russian, and his technique was to always have, you have a close up here, you have a long shot there, you have moving action going in this direction, then action going in that direction. Every panel was different, and whereas a lot of writers and artists use, for instance, the long shot only to establish
Mm.
where we are and so on. I use it liberally. I I like going full face close up to long shot to two shot. I like varying that up, and I think that's part of what gives it the pace.
Mm. Agree. Yes.
Yeah, I was just Joe hit on. It was very cinematic, and you know, I appreciate like you balanced it out very well between like Joe and I always talk about words on the page versus just artwork. It was a book that you had to take some time to read, but also there were some scenes where it was just the art telling the story. So
Mm-hmm.
I like the balance that you had between those two.
Thank you. That's not something I always knew how to do, frankly. When I was writing Dark Stars for DC Comics, that was a property that I created. Um, uh, I was experimenting with dialogue-less artwork, and looking back, didn't work. It didn't work. Later on, as I got into the series and I started doing more and more superhero work, um, I got better at it. But um, initially, it just looked like somebody forgot to put in the caption. But yeah, um, there's listen, I'm I've written over 80 novels, so so uh, I like words. I like dialogue. I really like dialogue, and so I put that in. But you don't want to overpower. You don't want to. Chris Claremont's known for you know tons and tons of dialogue, and I guess it works for him. But uh, I you have to have a balance.
Mm.
Absolutely have to have a balance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, it was good reading some because some modern comic books that we've talked about many times, they're $5.99, $6.99. It's beautiful art, but then you're done with the book in like 5 minutes. It's like
Yeah,
a dollar a minute for
yeah.
the
No bang for your buck there.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
you
know,
know,
I know. I used to, I used to like read, I would acquire here and there, I would acquire Marvel, pre-superhero Marvels, and I used to love to read them because I thought the stories were great. Um, and I figured, those were all like 15 to 20-minute reads. And it's true when you get oh, there's a puppy. You get into one of these very art heavy books, it's true. It breeze right through it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So we're appreciative of words, and we're appreciative of the balance of words and art. So we thank you for doing that in that graphic novel. So, but Jack, I know you said you got a lot of questions. Joe and I have had the privilege of speaking with Mike many times. This is your first time, so I'm going to give the floor to you for a little bit.
Great, Jack.
Oh, thank you, James. Thank you. And so one of the things, and again, I want to echo, James's sentiments. Thank you for sharing, the work with us. And I agree with Joe. It's highly, highly cinematic. I think you found the perfect medium. And the one thing I really appreciated about it is you have written science fiction without making it a space opera.
Mhm.
And I think that, takes, particularly considering on so much of the work that you've done in the past, you could have really easily just gone down that route, and you chose not to. And the thing, and as I was reading it, I kind of thought about John Truby's most recent book, The Anatomy of Genre, and in thinking about it, you have combined like 5 different genres in this one story. You've got science fiction, just a little hint of horror. It's a thriller. It's a detective because again, he's trying to recreate his own past. But again, and like we were saying with the artist, action, action, action. I mean, it's you never go 2 pages without someone moving or something happening, and so just again in from the reader's perspective in your world building, how did you kind of come to a place where all of that came together? Because in many ways, you have created something new and original, and you have played in so many other playgrounds in the past, and yet you've only taken just enough of them to establish what's kind of familiar in people's understanding, but you've created something all new and so interesting and visually stunning. And so I'm just curious as to like how.
Well, it's after a while. It's how can let's say you were composing. Um,
Mm,
you're maybe when you're starting out, you're thinking, okay, I have to. This is a piece for wind instruments, and then later on you go, boy, I bet you I could put in the percussion instruments with that. I don't know if that's a good idea, by the way. I'm not. It's a terrible idea, but but you go, oh, gee, how would they sound together? And then you
mm,
go, boy, I have the wind and I have the percussion. Maybe I could put in the brass, and so
mm,
initially you do that step by step, but then after a while you get a sense of how they work together, and you kind of put them in together. So that's sort of what I'm doing. I mean, I think certainly every good story has elements of mystery, right? You don't want to,
mm.
and particularly for me, a guy who grew up with Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, right?
Yes.
Every story has to have some mystery. It can't be exactly what
Hmm.
you expected. Um, and I think also every story has to have a little humor,
Mhm.
a
Hmm.
little comic relief. So when I'm clicking, I'm kind of writing for all those instruments. I'm writing for adventure. I'm writing for thriller. I'm writing for mystery. I'm writing for comedy. Um, and it's a product of experience largely. After you've done it and done it and done it, your mind kind of takes over, and 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 it just works that way. It's just like your muscles, right, James? Like, right?
Yeah.
Working on this
Yeah.
set of muscles, then this set of muscles, and before you know it, they're working together.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful composition to further the analogy. So I was very, very impressed with the thought and the care that went into every phase.
Good.
So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you for saying so. Okay, it looks like Joe has something to say.
Yeah, I would like to add one more genre that to Jack's list, and James will probably guess what it is, 'cause knowing me. There's an element of space western here too. Robinson Robinson Dark is kind of like the drifter who comes to town, gets embroiled in something that he didn't want to get embroiled in to begin with, and he kind of takes over and he saves the day. So yeah, I appreciate that. I love that.
Good, thank you. Yeah, when you coming back, Shane?
Yeah, exactly. Shane, come back.
Yeah. He's in some ways he's an outsider, and it's not really it's not really his fight.
Yeah.
Fight he's fighting, but he's kind of driven by duty. He has no emotions, right? He's devoid of those now. He's still driven by a sense of duty. So he he fights that fight that kind of predated him.
Very much so. Yes. Yeah.
So, Mike, we've kind of covered the essence of the Empty Space Universe, and then the a little bit of the original graphic novel. But now let's move into the Kickstarter a little bit. So we're going into a sequel. I know you said like you don't necessarily have to have read the original to get to enjoy this, but you're the writer and the person of the Kickstarter. I guess what do you feel comfortable saying about the new venture?
Well, first let me mention the cover artist, a guy named Jeff Hayes, who's just take a look at that cover. It's heartbreaking. It's just an amazing rendition of this character. One of the best parts of writing, ironically, is seeing what an artist does with your work. And Caio did a great job on the graphic novel, and Jeff did an amazing job on the cover for the prose novel, Empty Space Betrayal. So I want to mention him. So this kind of picks up where the other book left off. Um, there's a um, Robinson Dark is finding things out about the culture of the ship he's on, and how empties fit into that culture, and all of a sudden a mission pops up, and the mission has to do with the Poya, the warrior race that we saw in the original graphic novel. There are three species in space. In addition to humans, there are the Scandi, who are kind of scavengers. There are the Poya, who are the warriors, and the Nenaktu, which are these are kind of a little more scientifically oriented than the others, and a little perhaps sneakier. Well, there's a gathering of Poya and Nenaktu ships.
Mm.
The Crazy Horse, that's the ship that Dark finds himself on, is sent to investigate, and that starts a chain of events that gets into the nature of what it's like to be an empty, and the politics among the species and also within the species, and of course there's some betrayal in there. There's definitely some betrayal. So there's a lot of intrigue and a lot of mystery and a lot of character development, and these are things that I sort of became known for when I was writing Star Trek novels. So anybody who's read any of my Star Trek novels and enjoyed them I'm sure would love Empty Space. It's a it's a space adventure that's at once familiar to people who follow space adventures, but just a little bit different. And I like to say original. You know, they say there's nothing original out there, but you know what? There is. There is. It doesn't turn up that often, but I've been fortunate enough to stumble on things that haven't been done before, and this is one of them.
No, so I like you said, this is like a whole other, like it's different than a graphic novel. You're going to what you normally do is your prose, novel.
Yeah.
How long have you, like, since the original Empty Space? Like, how long have you been working on like this story?
About 10 minutes after that got published,
Wow.
started thinking about this. Um, and originally, originally I was thinking maybe another graphic novel, but um, working on as the publisher of a graphic novel is a ton of work and coordination and cajoling everybody into coming somewhere close to their deadlines um, and the final product was great. I was grateful for that, but it's a lot of work and a lot of uncertainty, and so I decided I would not be the publisher of another graphic novel. Um, so then I said, okay, so what if it were to be a prose novel? Cool. And then I was wrestling with the point of view. In the um, and tense. The in the graphic novel, um, uh, it's first person present. First person present is hard to do in a short story, right? Much less a novel. So I had to find a way of of expressing Dark's voice, the voice that had been established in the graphic novel, without going first person present, right? Because at first I do this, then I do that, then I turn around and I see that, keeping that up for 250, 300 pages. It's tough. It's tough reading. So I had to come up with another way of that felt true to the character, but wasn't first person present tense. So
Interesting.
that was a challenge. That was a challenge. But once I kind of ironed that out, and that took a while, honestly, um, then I started thinking about, well, what would I want to read if I were reading a sequel to Empty Space? What would I want to read? And I said, well, okay, I'd like some intrigue there. I'd like to get to know more about these different species. Um, uh, Dark before he died, funny, but before he died, um, was sort of an expert on the Poya. So he knows them, but mankind had not yet encountered those two other species at that point. So he knows nothing about them. But he knows quite a bit, more than anybody else on the ship, about the Poya. So we're kind of playing off what he knows, um, and what he thinks he knows, and maybe doesn't. Um, and it's interesting. It's interesting. It's fun. It's a lot of fun for me. Hopefully for the reader as well, but certainly for me, it's a lot of fun.
So I know, like with some of the other like Kickstarters you've come on for, like with the Phenomenons book, usually when you're coming on, it's in process or it's in development with the different writers and stuff. Is Empty Space Betrayal like done? Like
No, it's not. It's not done, but it's probably 25 to 30% done. Um, I promised it for June 2025. I'm sure it'll be done before then, but I've kind of learned when you do a Kickstarter, don't promise what you the date they think it'll really come out. Promise a date later on, so there's nobody going. You said it was coming in March. And listen, if you say March, they're perfect. It's a perfectly reasonable thing for them to go. It's March. Where is it? So I I I promised next June, and I'm sure I'll beat that promise.
No, that's cool because I know Jack, or he hasn't said, but I'm going to say for Jack, Jack is a writer. He's working on being a published writer. So you're in like process of this Kickstarter. So Jack, I'm sure you probably have some craft questions. I'm just going to like open it up to you again. If
Oh, surely. Thank you. And thank you, James, for expressing that. No, I want to focus on empty space, but I wanted to know from your perspective, in launching this, the sequel as a Kickstarter. Do you feel that gave you more freedom in your ability to carry on the kind of story you wanted to tell? Because so often, as James said, I think we there's the story that we've thought of, we've lived with for so long that we want to tell, and then there's always that concern whether the marketplace would be open to it, and so sometimes people will compromise on their vision, but I think moving forward through a Kickstarter that allows you to maintain your creative vision. You also have a successful track record, you have a following, and so then people who are supporting the sequel are supporting you because of what you have produced in the past and the joy you've brought them. And so I wanted to know if that was kind of part of
Yeah,
your
yeah.
decision.
I love kickstarting projects because it does give me that freedom. I mean, when I was writing Star Trek books, I wrote over 30 Star Trek books, and I enjoyed that. I liked bouncing off the walls that had been established, and I guess I was pretty good at it because, I very seldom got difficult notes from Paramount, who was the license holder at the time, and we always it was always pretty cooperative and easy to work with. Um, so I like bouncing off established walls, but I love doing what I want to do. I, as I like to say, I wake up every day and write exactly what I want to write, exactly when my wife tells me to. Right
It's a
now,
great system.
groceries here. What do you mean? Later. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it gives me a lot of freedom, and I like the freedom. But I also like the walls closing in. That's okay too. It's a different muscle, and
Mm.
and as long as you like the
Hmm.
universe you're working in, I think that's the main thing.
Oh, yes, and I just wanted to add, just kind of touch back to some of the other work that you've done, particularly the Star Trek, kind of My Brother's Keeper, that trilogy of books. By the way, on sale, $1.99, Kindle, Amazon. I checked it out today.
Great
And
story.
and the reason why I bring that up is yes, oh, amazing. And this is, and Joe, I think you may know where I'm going with this. Is you were able to bring life to a relationship
Hmm.
that was only seen one time on screen, and truly fleshed that out, and made it tangible for us, the fans. And in many ways, I feel what you're doing now with Empty Space. Insofar as you introduced Robinson Dark, and he is kind of disconnected from his own past, and so not only is the universe new to us as the reader, but it's somewhat even new to him. And then you are just kind of creating it around him, and you're taking us for along on the journey, and so that is a very very difficult thing to do, particularly in world building. There's the whole notion that you want to go in and explain everything to the reader first, and then essentially build that trust over time. Harry Potter just used fantasy. Essentially you have to accept the fact that there are witches and wizards, and there are muggles, and slowly over time you learn the rules. But essentially you drop us in, and so we are really just trying to build our understanding as the character is. And so I think in the opportunity to go from the graphic novel for the original and going now to prose for the sequel, that allows us to have more depth in the understanding, because I'm a longtime comic book reader, but there's just something much more intimate about reading, and seeing it through the character's eyes. And so I wonder if that was also part of the appeal, because again, it's just such an
Thanks.
exciting
Yeah,
thing.
I always, whether it's in prose or really even in comics as well, I try to put the reader in the roller coaster seat. I always, when I address, writers conferences and so on, I make that distinction. What's more exciting, standing on the ground and watching your friend in the roller coaster, or being in the
The
roller
roller
coaster, right?
coaster.
Being in the roller coaster. When you're in the roller coaster, you can only see what the guy in the roller coaster can see. You can't see behind you. God knows you're not looking behind you,
Hmm.
and you're looking what's ahead. There might be turns in that roller coaster that you're not aware of until you come to them. So that's how I try to write. It's all from a particular point of view. Um, and even the comic, even the graphic novel was all from that point of view. There wasn't, I don't think there was anything going on that Dark wasn't aware of. It was all what he was experiencing
Right.
as he was experiencing it. Um, so even though you may not be looking at everything through his eyes, because otherwise you wouldn't see him, um, but it's still a matter of his selective experience. And you can set up a lot of cool things there. Like if you were telling a story about in a post-apocalyptic setting, right? 1,000 years from now on Earth, and civilization's gone. You can talk about our civilization and perhaps describe it inaccurately. So you're setting up an interesting tension between what
Hmm.
we know we're like and what the characters think we're like. But so there's a benefit there if you stick with the character's point of view, and so that's what I like to do. You're experiencing that part of the universe that the character is experiencing, so you don't have to go into tons of, even in a novel, you don't have to go into tons of exposition. You only have to expose what
Hmm.
that character is experiencing. The character doesn't know everything, so the reader doesn't know everything. And it comes in handy also, like when you're talking about tech. um, Maybe the character doesn't know how the tech works either, and says, I don't know how that
Right.
works, but I know it does. um, so that saves you an explanation. So there's a lot of benefit to being inside the character's head and exposing their universe as they experience it.
As a reader, I want to be there for the ride. I want to be dropped in the middle. I don't want to know what's coming around every corner. I want to be surprised. I want to gasp.
Right.
So yeah, that's why I'm there, especially for heroic fiction. That's why I'm there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to put everything out there at once. It's, you want to dole it out little by little till at the end, perhaps you've doled it all out and the reader goes,
Mm.
now I get it. But yeah, yeah, too much exposition. Exposition dumps are are narrative killers. You know, sometimes you gotta dump a little bit, but you try to keep it to a minimum.
Did you ever? I guess having written so much Star Trek, did you have to do that for writing Star Trek, both in the books and the comic books, and even like you wrote an episode of Voyager? So was that like you had to? And in one of those things, you have to do a dump like they always do in Star Trek.
Well, in Star Trek, fortunately, you have the captain's log. Captain's log, star date, so and so. We're beaming down to a planet where, everybody, we're people, we're everybody's a hologram. Okay, and nobody knows it. So I think there was an episode of Deep Space Nine, maybe, for that, right?
Yes, there was. Odo, I think, figured it out. There was a crash landed ship, and then there was an
Now, okay, yeah,
engineer.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
excellent
so
callback.
yeah, uh, I forget what we were talking about, but anyway, that's the captain's log. Captain's log is very handy in that regard. That's what they used it for, and boy, it comes in handy.
You sort of the framework of Star Trek already has an information dump that the audience is accessible with. So
Right, everybody's cool with it. Nobody goes, "Oh, what, dumping information on me?"
So I'm curious, just because I always like to you always are so open with like the process of creation. So just going back to graphic novel creation, in the you were the writer, you had the artist, but I know you had a colorist, you had an inker. So were you the person coordinating
Oh
the
yeah,
original art with the colorist and inker, and what is like involved? So you're basically also the writer and editor in chief, right?
yeah, yeah. That was just a lot of work and a lot of difficult work. Um, even with the Phenomenons series that I'm editing, I'm currently wrangling writers, and these are, they're great writers and they're my friends, and I gotta say, at some point, I gotta say, okay, turn it in now, turn it in now, and I go, but I'm almost done. No, it's got to be
Now,
and I feel terrible doing that, but I have to do it, and of course they always rise to the occasion. But that's hard, and when you're doing it with artists, and a pencil artist, an inker, although Caio did both, um, colorist, a letterer. When you're working with all those people, it's even if they're very professional, it's very. My friend Brian Augustin passed away a few years ago. Was my editor on Dark Stars initially, and also edited some Flash stories that I did. Um, and he used to say, and the book, the Phenomenons book that's coming out soon will be dedicated to him. He used to say, if you pick the right horses, all you have to do is let them run, right? Pick the right talent, and they're professional and they're good. You don't have to do a whole lot else. Um, and so I aim for that. Fortunately, I'm not as good as Brian, so it's harder for me to wrangle talent. Um, he was more he had a firmer hand than I do. But you know it's a bitch to produce a graphic novel. It is very difficult.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. It's always like I always like to hear from like someone who's actually done it what it's like to put one of those things together, and it's not easy work. Sounds like.
It's not easy work, and it's sequential too. You can't have the letterer come in and give you the word balloons until you have the artwork, and can't have the inker work until you got the pencils and have the colorists come in, and it's difficult. And then you're dealing with a printer, right? And hoping to God that you know you gave them exactly what you want to see, and not like wait, the spine is in the middle of the cover. That's not what I want. Oh no. So yeah, and Kickstarter doesn't, I mean, the money I collect on Kickstarter, it doesn't give me a lot of leeway. It gives me some, but not a lot of leeway. So if I make a huge mistake, I'm in the hole.
Well, speaking of that, not the mistake, but the fact that we're talking about printing, and we said that the original empty space is one of the tiers you can back. Let's talk about as we wrap up this podcast. Let's talk about like everything you could possibly get. What are the different tiers or offerings or things you're trying to unlock with this Kickstarter?
Well, going along with the theory that it's better to be in the roller coaster seat, you can put yourself in the book in a number of ways. You or a loved one. You can go with a one-time mention. You can be a person, a street, a company, an ice cream shop. That happened one time, um, uh, and be in the book, which is not something that you could do when you walk into Barnes and Noble. Um, you can be a full-fledged character in the book and be what they call Tuckerized, where you become a character. Um, your likeness can be in the book. You can become the focal of a um, black and white drawing by an artist that you guys would probably recognize, a guy like Mike Collins, Darkstorm. um, and they're very, the guys I work with are very good at likenesses. Um, so there are different ways to get yourself in the book. You can also get the original graphic novel in hardcover, softcover, um, or electronic version. You can do the same with the novel. You can get it as a softcover, a hardcover, or the electronic version. Um, any combination of those is possible. There are also some rewards that have to do with things that I've already published, either independently or as part of the Star Trek publishing program. Um, so there are, and you can even write the dedication for this book if at the top reward level. So there's a lot of ways to participate, and uh, and I appreciate any kind of participation. It gets us a little closer to our goal. Um, you know, I feel like every project, not just mine, but every kick-started science fiction project um, is a way of furthering science fiction in general. Um, when people stop reading science fiction, it'll be done. It'll be done. So you want to keep it going. You don't really want to be at the mercy, if you can help it, of established publishers and established means of distribution like bookstores. God bless bookstores, but everybody thought Borders would be around forever, right? Not the case. So you want to
Yes.
preserve that kind of sacred bond between the reader and the writer of science fiction and fantasy, and this is a way to do it. It's really a way of saying I really appreciate all that science fiction that I've read growing up and now, and trying to pass it down to the next generation. Um, and so I'm going to support Empty Space Betrayal and projects like it. So I appreciate it when people do that. and of course I have I believe I have a loyal following, which I'm very grateful for. But there's always room for more.
Well,
Well, that's good.
I guess the most important thing, we're going to put this obviously out before, when's the deadline
The
for it?
deadline is June 12th in the evening is the last time that people can contribute to the project. We're a little more than halfway through, and also a little more than halfway through time that we have. So we're on track, but we take nothing for granted. And so I'll be plugging this project on social media like crazy, and my friends will as well, and my fellow writers, and uh, I hope it funds because I'd really like to get this book out
Well, we all here want to read it, so we hope hope it happens.
Damn straight.
Yeah. And before we fully
Absolutely.
wrap up, Mike, I know because on social media, just because we do have a lot of fans in New York from the store and everything, you're going to be in the upcoming Star Trek convention, right? Again this year?
I'm going to be at a Long Island convention tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Well,
Trek Long Island. I'll be there.
Mm.
I'll be at a convention in Pomfret, Connecticut, at the end of June, and I'll be at Shore Leave. The Shore Leave is a Baltimore-based convention. This year, it's in Pennsylvania. So I'll be at all those conventions coming up, and then I hope to be at the Javits Center in October, um, in part of the convention called Writer's Block, which I guess is part of Artist's Alley. That's the New York Comic Con. So I'm going to be in a lot of places, uh, but, uh, but, but, uh, but after Trek Long Island, the deadline for the Kickstarter, just soon after that. So keeping my fingers crossed.
well, thank you so much, Mike, for doing this podcast again. It was I love talking to you, hearing your process, hearing the things you're working on. I'm sure you got other things in the fire after Empty Space, so you'll be back. I hope you'll be back.
I'll absolutely be back, but for now, I want everybody to at least check out the Kickstarter campaign for Empty Space Betrayal.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Mike, for being here. Audience, if you're listening or watching this podcast, the link for the Kickstarter will be on our Facebook group. We'll put the link also in the YouTube page bio, so you can take a look at that. But of course, I could not do this episode with my other two co-hosts, so thank you, Joe, for being here.
You're welcome, James, and thank you, Mike. Sounds like a great Kickstarter. Creativity, participation, choice. What a package.
Thanks.
Sounds great.
And thank you, Jack, for being here.
Mike, this was again a wonderful opportunity, dream for me to finally meet you, one of my favorite writers. Again, I look forward to the sequel, and I will check out the Kickstarter.
Say hello
so
to your
thank you.
son for me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I always tell him it's just like, Dad gets to talk to real life writers, and this is my youngest is into comic books and science fiction much more so than my oldest is, and so I always tell him when he asks me something, I said, I was you before you. I was you before it was cool. So,
and listening audience, of course, if you like this episode, please follow, like it. If you are on YouTube, since we're new to the YouTube thing, I guess like or subscribe or whatever you're supposed to do there. If you've enjoyed this episode with Mike, he's got 2 other or 3 other episodes on YouTube, but he's got a bunch of others on our podcast feed on Spotify or iTunes, so check them out. We thank you for listening, and please back the Kickstarter, and we will talk to you soon.